Hey guys, welcome back, it's Ripe again. In today's video, an insanely entitled family next door constantly parks in my garden and driveway and destroys my flowers. I got all of them towed and they ended up suing me. Here is what happened. Let's dive right into the story. There is a proverb in Japan that states that a good neighbor increases property value, so naturally, we Japanese people like to do our best to be as neighborly as possible to each other, no matter if you get on with your neighbor or not. This is why oftentimes when two neighbors in Japan don't get along, they will most likely simply ignore each other and pretend either doesn't exist simply to help keep the peace and property values. I've always tried to be a good neighbor and for the most part things were quite peaceful between me and my neighbor. I would help them out when they needed assistance, just as they would gladly help me out when I needed assistance. A little while ago, my neighbor was grieving because they had lost a close family member. I did not pry, I paid my respects and wished their ancestors well in their rest, but I had no idea of the details. What I did know was that they were having a lot of friends and family around for the wake and needed some extra room to park their cars, so I said they could use my driveway for the weekend to make things easier for them. After that, I thought our relationship grew all the stronger from it, but the following months proved otherwise. With a death in the family, my neighbor inevitably needed support, which came in the guise of one of their children or nephews coming around regularly to check on their family member. Most of the time, they would park in the neighbor's driveway. That was until my neighbor started having some work done to their house. I think they were converting their attic or something. I did not pry too much. This had the knock-on effect of reserving their driveway for building materials and eventually a skip, which then meant that when the neighbors' relatives came around to visit them, they had to park on the road most of the time. Except for the fact that they did not do that. What they did actually do was take liberties with my hospitality and friendliness and park on my driveway. As if when I said they could park there over the weekend so long ago, extended beyond that weekend and to whenever they wished. I tried to let it go the first time, but it irritated me to no end, and so I did what any self-respecting Japanese man did in the face of a nightmare neighbor. I tried to ignore it and get on with my life, not wishing to rock any boats and disrupt the peace. It became increasingly harder to ignore my neighbor's relatives so brazenly parking on my driveway, especially not when at some point they had exchanged their little 5-door saloon for a whacking great SUV that was nothing more of a dirty great big truck. All lines had been crossed and it was time to bring my concerns to my neighbor, even in the face of breaking the delicate peace of our road. I did not talk to the owner of the SUV, but to my neighbor. It's considered polite in Japan that you take grievances to those that you are most connected with rather than the person you have the trouble with. So, although it was my neighbor's relative that I had a problem with, I did not know them, and being my neighbor's guest, my neighbor was responsible for their relative's behavior, being guests and all. Once the SUV was gone from my driveway, I went and spoke to my neighbor and asked them if they could speak to their relative and get them to stop parking on my driveway. This went as well as can be expected. They said that they would speak to their relative, though no promises were actually made, just vague words that they were gonna speak to their relative and get them to park on the road. A couple weeks went by before I saw the SUV again, and guess what? They were parked on my driveway again. I could feel war brewing in the air, a war that was going to be unavoidable if I wanted my driveway back. I tried to remain calm. My neighbor clearly has not had the chance to talk to their relative yet. I must give them time, but after the second time I saw the SUV parked on my driveway, I decided enough was enough. I marched around to my neighbors and told them right there that their neighbor needed to move their car off the driveway, to which they fortunately did. I stood on my doorstep and watched them back away and drive off. I thought that was that, but yet again, later, I caught them parking in my garden and driveway, and what was worse, this time, friends of them parked several other massive cars on my property as well, and they crushed my wife's lovely plans. I was fuming, and not wanting to play any more games, I called up a tow service and got the SUV and other vehicles towed away and impounded. When my neighbor realized what happened, they were raging. They warned me that this was not gonna be the last of it and that they would make me pay. I laughed and waved as they were forced to walk all the way back home. I had no idea where that was, but I hoped it was very far. A few months go by, and peace had been restored to my road, or so I thought. I get an unexpected letter. It's official looking and marked with the county court seal, and when I read it, it informs me that my neighbor is planning on suing me. What was worse was the fact that they were claiming I was being racist towards them because they were Korean and I was Japanese. It was ridiculous to say the least, but what was the absolute worst was that they were claiming their property extended across my driveway and even onto my garden. So technically, it was their driveway and garden, at least according to them. This had me confused the most, and I spent a lot of time checking, double-checking and rechecking the property boundaries. When the time came to show up to court, I was more than a little nervous. If the court was convinced that I had acted out of some sort of racist anger, I could be fined a lot of money and expect to waste my weekends doing community service, and that was the best case scenario. Luckily for me, I had a decent lawyer on my side, and he was quite easily able to convince the judge that I had acted in a satisfactory manner when dealing with a nightmare neighbor. It was not put exactly like that. My lawyer was a little more polite, and the fact that I had actually been a lot more polite about the situation than most would have certainly played in favor of me. However, then came the issue of the property boundaries. This was what I was concerned about the most, as I did not want to lose nearly a third of my property to my neighbor, but that also turned out to be something that worked more to my favor than theirs. So I don't know what possessed them to do such a thing, but the property certificate they held as evidence was forgery. It was quickly revealed that my neighbor had forged legal documentation. I can only speculate what they were planning, maybe hoping that when they produced the document I would just cave in and let them have my driveway and garden. However, they pleaded ignorance, but in the end, forging documents is a serious crime, and their pleas of ignorance fell on deaf ears as the judge judged them to the full extent of the law. Not only were they fined for damages, which was not a whole lot, but enough to refurbish the garden, but they were also sentenced to several years in prison. I could not believe my luck. I was just hoping to retain my driveway and for them to be issued a cease and desist order or something, but to have them locked up for 5 years really was something. I just hope this does not affect my property value. And the next one is titled Dead Petty Revenge. A couple of weeks ago, my uncle married his long-term girlfriend. As custom in my country, every wedding guest has to give the newlywed a gift for their marriage. For context, my parents have a mechanic workshop and my dad repairing the cars and my mom doing the documents part. Almost everyone in my town goes to get their car fixed there, including my other family members. As in every business, there are people who, after having the car fixed, promise to pay eventually because they are short on money and never do. Obviously, family are the most common ones that fall in this category. My uncles, mom's brothers, have a running theme of not paying on time or not at all, and my parents let them pass because, well, they are family. They prefer to let them go over causing any more drama in the family. One of my uncles, let's call him T, took his car to my parents' workshop to get it fixed. Since he needed a car while his was getting fixed, they lent him the business car, as is custom with the clients. A couple of months go by and my parents are tired of asking him to pay them and take his car away because it's affecting the workshop at this point and my parents' tax money, since they have to use their own money to pay for his repair because he doesn't pay them. Next Saturday was my uncle's wedding and my mom already knew what she was gonna do. Instead of giving them money or any of the gifts they asked for, she instead gave them the absent of his payment. Once the wedding passed, she gave them the envelopment containing all of his bills, summoning to the absurd amount of 2,000 euros. Basically, their wedding gift was getting their debt paid and not owing my parents money. They were pretty pissed about it because they were looking forward to getting money, which in my opinion is quite entitled, to be honest. And if you ask me, that's quite a great wedding gift. I thought my mom acted in a petty manner while also being nice, too nice maybe. And yeah, ripe stars, if you have watched until here, I would very much appreciate it if you could post some star emojis in the comments and maybe even like the video, because that would help me tremendously. Thank you so much, and the next one is titled Don't Mess with Nature. So my house is surrounded by 2 gardens, one in the front facing the street and one in the back bordering my neighbor's gardens. When my parents and grandparents moved into our house 26 years ago, they planted a thick hedge around the entire property. They also installed a rose arch over the pathway to our front door, and my grandfather was always busy keeping up the garden, planting, weeding, keeping everything very tidy. And then my grandfather died in 2002, and after that the garden was neglected for a few years as my parents were still working and my brother and I were in university/school. But then around 2005 my mom read something that we should plant stuff to help the bees, and she took over the gardens, planting lilac, rhododendron, roses and various poisonous berries. Later, we decided to also install raised garden beds with various kitchen herbs. My mom is now over 70 years old and has officially given the house over to my brother and me so that we won't be taxed on inheriting it when she dies. Since then, I've been sporadically taking care of the gardens. I like them in their wild shape with all the birds, bees, bumblebees and butterflies flying around. In autumn, we get hedgehogs and we've been visited by a fox recently, which sent my cats into a panic. And then recently, we received a letter from the city stating that our garden was interfering with the safety of the street because the hedge was overgrowing the pavement and contained poisonous berries which were a danger to children. Now, my brother trims the hedge every month to make sure nothing is overgrowing the pavement in any way, and while the berries are poisonous, to get to them you would have to be quite resilient because they are surrounded by thorns. They are also known to be ideal food for some local birds, so I contacted our local nature conservation association and asked if they would like to have a look at our gardens and maybe tell us if we could improve anything to make them more nature-friendly. They came and looked around and then told us that they rarely see gardens so in touch with nature. They approved our gardens as especially nature-friendly and contacted the city to tell them that from their point of view any changes would be considered unfriendly to nature, and since our city prides itself with once being one of the green capitals in our country, they had to budge. Don't mess with my gardens. And the next one is a story about a stupid boss. So this happened a few years ago, but I was reminded of it because a lot of it is becoming public. Insurance companies are not your friends and will do everything they can to save money, including not paying for your medically necessary services. There is a lot of news coming out about insurance companies using algorithms to deny claims and doctors signing off on them. Before algorithms, they would have minimum wage employees reading over these claims for the doctors instead, and that's what I was. At the time, I was 19 years old working for an insurance company denying claims. I would be the first line for doctors to call and give their case for why they thought they needed a service or medicine. For some reason, 19-year-old me with no medical experience was allowed to tell these doctors that services were not needed medically. This job was the easiest yet most miserable job experience I ever had. I was only able to last a few months there. During my last 2 weeks, I was really slacking off. I was just so burnt out, I could not stand denying yet another case where someone needed medicine and the insurance company did not want to pay for them. I was reprimanded for not working hard enough and getting processed, insert my malicious compliance. I worked faster than I ever had before. That's because I approved every case that came before. Every doctor I spoke to, I just gave them approval. Every prior authorization I saw was approved. During my first week, I did this once and was told not to do it again because I have to follow company guidelines, but I didn't care at this point. I probably was able to approve 50+ cases before I quit. I hope it made a difference to those people. Screw health insurance companies. And the next one is titled, I Got a Family Kicked Out. So I'll keep it short and sweet. Today I went and saw 1917, a pretty violent World War I movie. There was a large family beside us, 5 adults, 4 preteens and teen boys in the row ahead, and here's the kicker, a 1 to 2-year-old and a set of twins less than 6 months old. Obviously, the babies were a huge issue throughout. The movie has a pattern of very long quiet moments of whispered dialogue and then boom big noise due to sudden gunshots and bombs. Basically, the perfect storm for waking up babies. They continued to cry and cry. The family was constantly loudly shushing them but not leaving the theater. So as you guessed, after about an hour I went and complained. I like to talk to people personally most of the time to try to resolve issues instead of going straight to the manager like a Karen, but in a movie this was not really possible, and so they ended up kicking out everyone, 5 adults, 14 and kids, and the 3 infants. My girlfriend was pissed at me, saying I should have just dealt with it, and it's not like I cannot hear what's going on. And I'm pretty sure I embarrassed her too, since it was pretty obvious I was the one who turned them in. So I guess what I want to know is both, am I the a-hole for getting them kicked out, and or am I the a-hole for embarrassing my girlfriend instead of just sitting through the annoyance? And yeah, Ripe Stars, let me know in the comments what you think about this. People on Reddit said, not the a-hole, who the hell brings 3 babies to a theater? Comment number 2, not the a-hole. People who bring infants to a movie suck, especially if the movie is not for kids. I get that sitters are expensive, but movies are optional. Either pick an infant-friendly event for your evening out, get a sitter, or stay home. Comment number 3, not the a-hole, it sucks for them, but they could have found a babysitter, and you paid to watch the movie not to hear babies cry. At the very least, they should have taken the babies outside when they cried. And by the way guys, what I'm curious about, how the hell are babies allowed into a World War I movie? Aren't some of these movies at least 16 plus or something? Maybe exceptions are made for babies, I'm not sure. The next one is another Ask Reddit story concerning the topic creepy true stories. I was driving through Illinois to get to Chicago about a decade ago with a group of friends, and we stopped at a Taco Bell. The first thing we noticed was that the workers were acting very odd. Everything they said was monotone and rehearsed. After sitting in this fairly busy restaurant for a bit, we kind of all just looked at each other at the same time as we realized that none of the conversations happening around us made any sense. The people were speaking and it was English, but the sentences were not logical. They were just saying words at each other. We did not say much about it until we got outside, at which point we all freaked out and confirmed each other's experiences at once and got the F out of there. We jokingly refer to that place as the NPC training center, since the people did not seem to be real, or they were learning how to be human or something. It still freaks me out. And yes, I believe the orders were all correct, which I guess just ups the creepy factor. Edit number 2, we were young and actually pretty straight edge at the time, none of us were high or anything. Edit 3, the best I can remember about the weird conversations was that they were stringing several prepositions in a row with no real sentence structure, forced laughter and nodding, stuff like that. Like they were mimicking how humans talk. Think of those what English sounds like to a non-speaker videos on YouTube, but everybody was doing it all around us. A user in the comments has helped me determine that Pontiac, Illinois is possibly the town, has a TB right off of 55. I was not clear yesterday, but the weird conversations were happening between customers, not just the workers, so it was not the crew trying to mess with us. If it was just the workers, I would totally buy that theory. I used to work retail, and you would do anything to make the day go by faster. And now let's move on to the next story. It starts like this. I live in a cul-de-sac with other houses on either side of my property. It is quite a lovely neighborhood, and although my neighbors are nice, I believe they have taken advantage of me and my niceness as well. Being that we do live in a cul-de-sac, parking can be a bit trickier if we have guests over or are throwing a party. However, whenever I, myself, have guests coming over, they only park in my driveway or in front of my house. 2 times they have parked in front of someone else's house, but I've always let my neighbors know and it was never an issue. So here is where the issue begins. I'm aware that the parking is limited in our neighborhood and in the cul-de-sac, so one weekend when my neighbors were throwing a birthday party for their son, I allowed them to park 2 vehicles in my driveway. Our driveways were kind of side by side with each other and there was no official marker between them. However, I did not think after this that they would keep on parking their car there. However, they took advantage of this and kept parking their second car in my driveway. One day, weeks later, my husband came home and could not even park in our driveway because our neighbor's car was parked. I was home at the time, but I had not even realized they had parked in our driveway. It was awfully late as well, or else we would have gone over there and asked them to move. When we got up the next morning, their car was gone. A few days later, the car was parked in our driveway again at night. We decided to write a polite note and stick it on the car so that hopefully this would let them know that we were not okay with them parking in our driveway. However, just a few days after we placed the note there, the car was back. We even tried talking to our neighbor face to face, and when we confronted them about it, they were apologetic and even said they felt bad for parking in our driveway. They assured us that this would not happen again. Of course, however, it did happen again. As a matter of fact, it happened several times and I was becoming increasingly frustrated because when my husband came home from work, he would have to park in the street. I know it may not seem important, but it seemed quite ridiculous because we could not even park in our own driveway. I'm not a very direct person and I do admit I avoid confrontation. I was starting to think I was too nice when I spoke to them or left them notes. Either way, I had enough. I figured this was not a police matter, or it was, I'm not really sure, but I decided to call a towing company and have their car towed from my driveway. I let them know that this car was not mine and showed them mine and my husband's registrations and whatnot to prove it. They ended up towing the car out of our driveway and our neighbors have not parked there since. I am only assuming they had to pay the towing company in order to get their car back. And while it sucks that our neighborly relationship was ruined, they no longer speak to us, I was glad that we were able to park in our driveway again. Some people are just extremely entitled. And yeah, ripe stars, I would definitely agree with OP in this situation. Towing the neighbors was absolutely the correct decision. And with this, we have reached the end of the video. However, if you cannot get enough of my content, please check out my endless playlist, where you can find thousands of hours of content. In addition, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel to not miss any of my daily uploads. Thank you so much in advance, and I hope to see you again tomorrow.